This week, we're going to start to design a unique logo for a business. You're all going to do some research and find a restaurant that you want to create a design for. The restaurant should be a small mom and pop business, ideally. So it shouldn't be a huge chain like McDonald's. It should be a one location business that doesn't have a lot of identity already established. So before we get started, though, I want to talk about logos and talk about the process a little bit. So, exactly what is a logo? They're just little marks or a word of text, but they are hugely crucial to the identity of a business. So, a logo is an identifying symbol. It can also be called a brand mark, identifier, logotype, or trademark. Logo is just the most commonly used term, and it can represent and embody everything a brand or group signifies. And the goal of a logo is to provide immediate recognition. There's definitely a process that you want to follow when you start to design a logo. You really want to have a ongoing relationship with the client where you're talking to them, you're discussing the company, the product, the organization. And so the first step in the process is to create a design brief. In collaboration with the client, you create a brief that describes what the purpose of the design is. So you'll have a series of questions you'll ask the client, you'll be taking notes, and you'll look at yourself as the design expert and the client as the product or company expert. They really know the product a lot better than you. So this is your opportunity to understand what the product is. And they can also help you understand who the competitor is, who the major competitors are, and how they want to distinguish themselves from the competitors. So this proposal, this brief will out of this brief will come a proposal, a design proposal that clearly explains the objectives, goals, and deliverables that you're going to provide for this client. There's different types of logos. And when you start to design your logo, you're going to actually explore all different types. So in your sketching process this week, I really want you to sketch word marks. I want you to sketch letter marks. I want you to sketch symbol marks and combination marks. Because when you actually develop your final logo, you're going to develop different variations of it. And I want you to get used to this process. You're actually going to develop 3 different grayscale logos to present, and that from those 3 original grayscale logos, you'll pick your final logo. But basically, the most common type of logo is probably a word mark. And this is just the name spelled out in unique typography or lettering. Then there's also letter marks, which are basically the initials of a brand name or a company. And then there's symbol marks. A symbol mark can be an abstract or pictorial visual, and it's usually a graphic or illustration. And then there's combination marks. Combination marks are also very common, and a combination mark would be a word mark, letter mark, and then a symbol attached to that in combination with that. So here's some examples of word marks, and you can see that we're starting with the Foyds, which is a popular musical group, and their logo contains this kind of uppercase lettering, sans serif uppercase font. And notice the experimentation that's happening though. So you don't just have to have all of the text in with the same tonality. You can change that. So when we start out this process, we're going to be working with gray, but you can actually make your letters have different shades of gray or break the word into 2 parts or 3 parts perhaps. You don't have to have left to right alignment. You can stack or you can put a word on its side. So it all depends on what you're trying to achieve and communicate with your design. One thing a logo has to be is it has to be versatile. It has to be able to go in different places. So here's an example of the logo, the previous logo we saw, the Foyds, put into some of their marketing material. You can see that now color's been applied and they're kind of bringing it in. And it's very versatile in that you could kind of shift this logo into different circumstances and it's still going to look good. And it's also going to let the other visuals have a presence. So sometimes if you design a logo that's too complicated, it can kind of overwhelm the design a little bit. Here's Maroon 5, and Maroon 5 is interesting because the designer that created this logo actually created a whole alphabet. And this logo created the Maroon 5 font, which you can find on DaFont. And it's also really a fun logo. I love the interlocking O's. It's very versatile as well. So you see that they're kind of mixing it up. Sometimes they have the letters be very thin and all of the letters overlap. Sometimes they kind of spread them apart a little bit and just the O's overlap and link. They play with the M where they kind of crop it and they let it kind of dip into a color. So, there's different variations of the logo, but the basics that you start with should stay the same. Word marks can be hand drawn, so a lot of designers will kind of hand draw the font used for the logo and then scan it into the computer and use that as a template. They'll vectorize it and start to do things to it. And lettering is actually a perfect way to get the look that you want. So there's tons of fonts out there, but when you have something really specific in your mind, it's sometimes just best to just draw it yourself, scan it in, and make that drawing the actual final design. And it just depends on, what your limitations are with fonts, but also what effect you're trying to achieve. It also kind of makes the font yours, or it makes it the companies that you give the logo to. So you're going to watch a video next week by Margot Chase, and she almost always does this, where she will create an alphabet for the company that she's designing for, so that they have this unique font that they can use for their identity and their products. So here's another example of a hand-drawn type then turned into a logo. And you can see this one has great texture. So here's an example of a word mark, but there's a little bit of a graphical element occurring with the B there. So a really clever solution for logo development is you want to keep your logo versatile. You also want to keep it simple. So sometimes the best way to get some information in there, but keep the design simple, is just to modify one of the letters slightly, and that can kind of add that information in. These are also examples of just word marks, very famous logos, and we'll be talking about some of these a little bit later on in the lecture. Letter marks similar to word marks, except they're just the letters of the product, and sometimes it's just one letter. And that can be really appropriate for a lot of different reasons. You might want to just have a letter if the actual name of the company or product is really long and kind of ungangly and it's really hard for people to read. Then it's often really appropriate to simplify it, because that will actually make it much easier for people to identify with it. And you really want to think about word marks or letter marks if a name is reasonable and distinctive. Sometimes it's useful if you have limited funds, because you really want to focus on name recognition. And you often want to associate products with or subsidiaries of products with the parent more clearly and directly than a symbol. Let's go on here a little bit. Here's a great example of a letter mark using these two letters, ED, and this is an electrical company, and they're combining in a very clever way the initials of the company to denote an electrical plug. And these are words from the designer. When I put the uppercase E and D next to each other and saw the negative spaces in the E as prongs on an electrical plug, which the D resembled, the solution was obvious. So in that brainstorming process, when you're just hand drawing and you're trying to go in all different directions, I'll go back to that previous slide where we look at three letters, DWT, but we look at all the different possibilities, all the different variations that you're brainstorming. Sometimes the idea will just be simple and it'll come together in the end as kind of a brilliant final solution. This was a logo for a beverage company or soft it was soft drinks, and they wanted to really communicate technology. They wanted it to have this kind of edge and look high tech, and they wanted to be able to put in these real vibrant neon colors into the final solution, and they wanted to kind of mix it up and change the colors. And so this seemed like a great solution. And sometimes it's really nice to enclose the word or the letter in a frame. Circles are really popular because circles have great energy and people like circles, but you can also think of rectangles or squares as kind of framing the letter and making it have this kind of boundary that kind of keeps it in one place and makes it really easy for people to kind of digest. So that's sometimes a good solution. Symbol marks are just the graphical element, and sometimes they're really appropriate, and they can either be abstract or literal. They can be objective or non-objective. And they're perfect, for example, if you need some sort of emblem for a product. Like auto companies almost always use these symbols, these abstract symbols, because they can put them on their car hoods and on their other products. Sneakers, for example, you sometimes want a symbol to put on a clothing line so that the clothing line gets identified as people wear it, but you wouldn't want to necessarily put a word on there. And sometimes it's really useful to link these symbols to subsidiaries of parent organizations, much easier than it might be to link a specific word, for example. Combination marks are sometimes the best solution if you need to have the name in there or the initials, but you also want to bring something else in, some other symbol, some other idea. And so a combo mark is very prevalent in logo development, and we're going to look at a bunch of them a little bit down the slide lecture here. Here's one, for example, Cosmocom. And Cosmocom was this great company in New York City, and the logo was very bright and energetic. It symbolized fast delivery and user friendliness. So, this was an online company that promised free 1 hour delivery of video games, DVDs, music, mags, books, coffee, and more. So, they wanted that high energy. They wanted to have the graphical figure running. And you notice how simplified that figure is. It really almost looks like a letter shape. So they've taken this concept of a person running and they've abstracted it and simplified it into this great symbol that they can use for their logo. So I really recommend that when you draw out your symbols, take it and abstract it as much as you can and try that abstracted version in the design, because logos really need to stay simple. A complicated graphic won't work often for a logo design. So a simplified abstract graphic is often the best solution. Here's Conversa, and just another great example of taking a letter and putting a little symbol in there. This is voice recognition software, so it was just perfect. The symbol worked perfectly in that spot. Disney, we looked at this logo a little bit earlier. So the Disney logo was based on the signature of Walt Disney, and it was supposed to be cheerful. And they also wanted to symbolize quality televisions. So the founder's signature was important here because this is a high quality product. They wanted to communicate that. They wanted to put the signature of Disney himself on their products. So here's an example of a logo that's not using a graphic, it's using a bitmap image, a photograph. So we've learned a little bit already about the difference between bitmaps and vectors. So a huge critical difference is bitmaps are resolution dependent, which means that it's really hard to scale them large. You can scale them down, make them smaller, but it's hard to make them larger. So often logo designers don't want to use a bitmap graphic. They want to keep the graphic in vector format so that they can scale it. Vector graphics are much easier to scale because they're mathematically defined, so there's no resolution tied to a vector graphic. In saying that, there's other reasons you don't want to use a photograph. Sometimes photographs are too specific. There's also a lot of information in photographs, so it makes the simplicity idea hard to design. but occasionally they're perfect. And sometimes they're perfect if you, for example, want to design a logo for a photographer. So in this case, the actual MR and the circle were the only consistent factors because this was a photographer. They were going to place in many different products because the photographer was a product photographer so that you could kind of get that idea. So it depends on what you're designing for. You never say never, but 99.5% of the time, you're not going to use a photograph. You're going to create a graphic. So here's a bunch of different logos for personal chefs. And I just want to talk a little bit about thinking in terms of what makes a logo successful. So if we look at this top graphic right here, it looks good. I think the fork concept is great for the company. This is a personal chef, so the fork gets that idea across. It's simple, it's abstracted to some degree. Now, the only problem with this is it's huge in comparison to this text, and there's a lot of text here. So if I were to have this as my logo and then I try to design a business card with it, it's going to be almost impossible for me to put that on there and still read that text. So you have to think about the graphic in relation to the text. If the text is too small or there's too much text, it's going to be really hard to scale that logo. And a logo um, has to be able to be scaled effectively. So then if you look at the two in the middle here, let's go over here to this initial one. This is actually pretty sophisticated. I love those letters, very ornate, decorative. They're appealing. Now, my one issue with this would be I don't know if this was a company that was trying to get some recognition. I have no idea what the NR symbolizes until I read the text down here. It's nice in a logo, in the symbol or in the initials, to kind of have that idea of what they're trying to communicate a little bit. And this, to me, could be almost anything um, that I kind of read it as something that's service based, but I would like to see more of the chef in there. Even though it's beautiful, it's well done, I personally would like a little bit more of the product in there. This one, on the other hand, is nice. I mean, they're getting the fork in here. I love these leaves, kind of symbolizing the product in terms of being healthy and natural, maybe organic. You could think about organic in terms of the color green. And the fork is bringing in that concept of food, obviously. Now, the only issue with this logo might be that it's pretty ornate and large. It does scale really well. So when I look at it small, I see it and it's not a problem, but it's a lot to digest for a logo. Often you want a logo to be a little bit more simple. But see down here, you're seeing the hand-drawn fonts, which kind of give you that personal association to the chef, like it's somebody's handwriting. That can be a nice touch. I really love this logo and how they're kind of framing it in. And I don't think I would put the background in there necessarily. I would keep the frame simple, but I love the graphic. I think the graphic has great texture. It goes really well with the name Fig, and so I think it's got a lot of potential. I'm going to move on. There's another one here. So I just wanted to put this in here because this could be an effective logo for a personal chef, but it's about that experimentation and really tying things together. Making the graphic interact with the text is pretty critical in logo development. So you always want to make sure that you've gone in all these different directions and kind of exhausted all the possibilities, and that you're staying true to what the company is trying to communicate. The logo should be appropriate. It should really communicate something about that company. And a great example would be, if you're thinking in terms of a company that is a product that's natural and you put in a high-tech color, for example, that's not going to work. You kind of have to think about the organization, what colors, what shapes, what's going to go with it. Converse, if you notice, the logo is great because it meets kind of all the criteria for a logo. It's simple, abstracted. Really, the basic logo is a star with a circle surrounding it with the unique text. It is versatile. It goes in almost everything. You can put it on a product. It's that star and that circle can go anywhere. It's memorable. So I like to look at it. It's something that is unique and original, or at least it was when it came out. So it makes it kind of stick in your mind. So the ideas you want to think about with logo development are logos should be simple, they should be memorable. The symbol has to have some sort of meaning, and that meaning has to relate back to the ideals, the goals, the products. It has to be versatile, and it should definitely be appropriate. The Target logo, what I love about the Target logo is the use of negative space. So white makes that third ring in there, and it's just going to seamlessly go into all of this different material. It's also hitting all the bases. It's simple, it's memorable, it's versatile, and it's a symbol that can be placed anywhere. We see the FedEx logo, which what's really nice about this logo, if you've never seen it, there's a graphic here. So there's this arrow that's pointing off to the right here, symbolizing that we're going forward, that we're going in a direction. And FedEx is all about delivering and making sure that the mail gets there quickly. So that's very appropriate. So that hidden symbol there is pretty important. I didn't notice it for a while, and then when I saw it, became obsessed with it. Every time I'd see FedEx, I'd look at that symbol and think how clever it was. So it's really a clever design, kind of bringing in these two elements and using the negative space in a very clever way. So when you design your logo, always think about that negative space. Maybe there's some opportunity there for you to create something interesting to bring that idea forward. The Twitter logo. So this one is interesting because they actually had a whole redesign of their logo. This was the original logo, and they were using a bird because they wanted the bird to be a symbol of hope and limitless possibility. So it felt really appropriate to them. And also, their idea was tweeting, and birds tweet, right? So there was this association with tweet. And they developed this logo, but then they kind of felt like it wasn't right. And they wanted to simplify it and make it a little bit more symmetrical. So there's a whole video that shows this. I'm just going to grab the video. I think it's behind here. I can grab it out for you and show you the video. See if it plays. So you see that they shed those feathers. Let me get back to the original image here. They made the top of the bird much more circular, and now this bird is kind of fitting. It's part of this three-circle design, and it's using the negative and the positive, and it's making it very symmetric, which they felt was a much better solution for their company. So just when you're doing your logo, you want to think about the product, you want to think about what the design is. And one strategy that I always like to kind of bring into this process is just writing down adjectives. So this will be part of your project this week. You're going to need to write down specific adjectives that describe your restaurant. And then you can start with a whole list, like 10 or 20 adjectives. And then I want you to narrow it down to really two or three good adjectives that describe what you're trying to achieve with your design. That can be really helpful. It can kind of bring you in a direction. So for this logo, for example, it's a writer's personal logo. They're using this typewriter font, which is really appropriate. We think of the writer and the typewriter. The writer's hat brings that information in, and then they're kind of using this negative space as well, where the text kind of cuts the shape into the hat. Coca-Cola, we've talked about Coca-Cola a little bit in a previous lecture, but this was the product that was invented in 1886, and in 1900 they developed this decorative script logo. Art Nouveau was kind of the design trend at the time, and so you can see that influence here. In 1969, it became red, and in 1923 it lost its copyright because it's such an old logo. So you can actually use this logo in your own work. And so this logo just has been around so long, and it really helped to brand this product that's now international. It's probably one of the most well-known products in the world, if not the most well-known product in the world. The Olympic logo the circles represent the union of the 5 original major continents: Africa, America, Asia, Australia, and Europe. And it's really they're trying to signify the circles as being the meeting and connection of the athletes from around the world. The Morton Salt logo, unlike regular salt of the day, in 1914, the idea was that this salt didn't clump when you poured it. And so it was different because it didn't have these clumps, even when it was wet. And so they brought in the idea of rain. They brought in the idea of the little girl kind of letting the salt pour out as she carries it home. And you can see all the different variations of this logo as it's gone through the years. And the biggest thing you can see is how the style has changed and how it's been simplified as we kind of move forward. Nike, we talked about this logo a little bit. This one is just a great logo because it transitions so easily. That mark has a lot of energy, it has a lot of power, and you can put it in almost anything seamlessly. Let's just show you a few examples of that. This is Nike in water. Quaker Oats. So this was the original logo. You can see it's not much of a logo. It's more like an elaborate illustration there. And then in 1946, they kind of just used the face and the neck of the Quaker as the symbol. Then they kind of stylized it a little bit more, bringing in the name Quaker, and but keeping that portrait in there. And then in 1972, Saul Bass famously redesigned this logo to be kind of a clever play between negative and positive. And this logo, what's great about it is it's something that we all kind of grew up with, or at least people in my age group grew up with. It's very familiar to us. There's a sense of nostalgia about it. So logos do that to you. They kind of become uh, emotionally connected. A really great example of this is Apple. So Apple, I think I have a slide of Apple. We'll try and get to it in a minute. But Apple projects a humanistic corporate culture that has a strong corporate ethic. It's characterized by volunteerism, innovation, community involvement. It's emotionally humanist. It's an emotionally humanist brand that connects with people. And when you buy their products, you almost feel like you're part of this community or tribe. And it's that emotional connection that these companies are striving to attain, because once they get that, this symbol will be much more than just something to quickly identify a company with. It'll really kind of draw people in. YouTube logo. This one just has that simplicity about it. The framing of the tube here was really clever. It's versatile, it's memorable, it's simple, meeting a lot of the criteria. Yahoo. Yahoo is a company that wanted to connect people to passions. And so the placement of the letters was really important here because Yahoo actually means rebel, and you're not supposed to follow direction if you're Yahoo. So they wanted to get this kind of almost chaotic jumping effect with their letters where you do what you want, you don't follow the norm. And they brought in this bright purple color, which is a color that most people kind of it makes people passionate, it makes people feel energetic. Just a couple more examples of logos. This is kind of using three-dimensional balls here, so it's kind of nice for this particular product. It's almost like a photograph, but it's actually an illustration. It's very large though, so this is another one that might be a little bit decorative, a little bit too ornate, and hard to kind of place and scale in many different things. And sometimes that can be really problematic as you start to develop more of your identity. So as we kind of go forward, just making sure that we understand that there's three things we're looking at here. We're looking at logos, we're looking at identity, and we're looking at the brand. So logo will really identify a company in its simplest form. And it's like a name. We have to get familiar with it before it will function in the way it's supposed to. And then once it functions in the way it's supposed to, it creates and becomes part of this identity. And that's the visual aspects that form the overall brand. So that can be, in addition to the logo, the letterhead, the marketing materials, the website, anything out there that connects this kind of visual connection to the brand. And so the brand itself is this perceived emotional corporate image as a whole. And here's just a clever one with KFC. So they redesigned their logo recently, and it's a great redesign because it's keeping that association, that emotional association we had to the Colonel, who's been part of our lives for so many years. But they're kind of modernizing it and abstracting it a tiny bit more. Instead of the kind of rigid tie that he has on, they put an apron on, making him a little bit more homey. And they enlarged KFC here to make it almost more prominent within the space. BMW, another great logo. This is just beautifully redesigned in 2000 with this kind of three-dimensional depth, and it works really great with the marketing. So this is an example of using 3D beautifully in logo design. Sometimes when you use 3D, it's not going to work because it's too much information, it's too complicated. But for this particular logo, it scales, it's memorable, it's actually simple enough, and it's a great thing that because it's actually kind of mimicking the emblem that they're putting on their product. So I did talk about Apple a little bit already, but you can kind of see the redesign of their logo. They've gone from very ornate and decorative and looking like an apple orchard here. There's one little apple kind of dangling off that tree to kind of lots of color, lots of energy to more sophisticated black to their current gray. Pepsi-Cola. We'll just kind of see how their logos developed over the years and what it went from in 1898 to today. And you can see, unlike Coca-Cola, they've changed it pretty radically through the years until there's no longer this kind of Art Nouveau-esque style font that they started with in 1898. Red Truck Publishing. So sometimes, in the case of this logo, it's a publishing company. So why a truck? You might ask that. And so there is a reason. So the truck was significant because the owner of the company had this big red truck, and that's what they drove around all the time. And that truck became kind of part of who they were and how they marketed themselves. And so it was appropriate to bring this red truck in. Now that might only be appropriate for a smaller company, a local company where you're almost inside of a community and well known by a community of people. But sometimes that can be successfully incorporated in if there's something about the owner, the individual, the company itself that you want to tie in and have fun with. Umbra, so you can see that this U is meant to be that vase, and it's pretty clever the way you can kind of just simplify it, abstract it, and also fit those beautiful flowers in there. Light flow. So kind of coming down, I'm gonna analyze some of these logos a little bit, and I might be nitpicking them, but I'm just gonna do it because I think it's always important when you finish your logo, you'll have this great sense of satisfaction and you'll be proud of it and you'll love it. And then it's just kind of side by side comparison. So what I would do with this one is I actually really like this graphic here. I think a great graphic to pair with a logo because it's simple, it's memorable, um, and it's very versatile. And the text, just a simple sans serif font, seems to be working pretty well here. The only thing I would do is I would tighten the gap up just a little bit between the text and the graphic. So this is something I really want you to pay attention to: the spacing of the letters, um, and how it relates to the graphic. How far away from the graphic is it? You really want to build that connection to the graphic. Rocketown Records. I love this little symbol of the rocket here. And the text I think is good. It's kind of this uppercase font. There's a little bit too much space here. I would have moved this over myself just to see. Or one thing you can do is you can do kind of a side by side comparison. So you can put one version and slightly tweak it and put it right underneath, and then slightly tweak it and put it right underneath until you go too far and you're like, nope, I've got to stop. I've got to spread it out a little bit more. Just make sure that you get these details. I mean, designers are pretty meticulous in the details, and so you really want to make sure that you're getting the absolute best solution you can get. Andrew and Company. I love the whimsy of this. This is kind of an upscale clothing company, and what they did is they took this graphic is very I think appropriate for the company. It's fun. It's beautifully rendered, just simple lines. And then they took this text, and it's pretty sophisticated, the text, but they had fun with it by varying the size of the letters. And this kind of brings out that playfulness. It feels very childlike, but it still feels clean and stylish and upscale. This is the second logo I want to show you because I actually love the graphic for this logo too. This is the Tomato Family Foundation. And I think that graphic is just so fun and amazing. It's simple, it's versatile, but it's just very memorable. But then the font here, they made the T and the F all larger than the rest of the word. I think they would have been much better off just to make it all the same size here, make it visually consistent, because what you're really looking at and what you're really enjoying in this logo is this graphic. So try not to go overboard is what I'm saying. Sometimes the tendency is to keep going, keep stylizing, keep making it memorable, but you might want to pull back and focus on, what is the most interesting thing about the logo? That should be the thing that you imagine people focusing on, and then don't overdo it with the font or the text. Stop and smell. Is this a good logo? No. Why isn't it a good logo? Because it's just way too big. It's going to be hard to place in any sort of marketing material without it really dominating and overwhelming the design. So just be careful of that. Even though it's a nice graphic, and visually when I look at it, I'm intrigued by it. I like it. You have to remember what the goals of the logo are: simple, memorable, versatile, and appropriate. So here's a couple of redesigns that just maybe aren't so good. So this is the old Kraft logo, and then this is the new Kraft logo. I just don't see any association to the food. They completely changed it. And, this is an old company. So there must be something wrong if they have to completely change their logo. So I feel like this new version is not as successful as the old version, and it's not appropriate for the product. This is Kraft Foods. The other reason that it's not appropriate is because it really mimics the Yoplait yogurt. So you see this visual tie here. So if you find yourself designing a logo and then someone tells you, or you kind of notice it yourself, that's a cool logo, but it sort of looks like the logo for, then you have to step back and you have to think, I don't want my logo to be the second version of another logo. And so Kraft Foods did this. It's so similar to the Yoplait logo that it's almost disturbing. So be careful of that. It's easy to do because, you forget, you kind of get in this creative inspiration. You've been looking a lot, and I really encourage you to look at things because that's how you kind of get ideas and generate ideas. And it's not that you don't ever want to use inspiration or idea from things that you see, but you want to make sure that your logo is original and that it's not just kind of a replication of something that's out there already. Okay, appropriate. We talked about this. So this logo is a real logo and it's wildly inappropriate. So these are funeral directors. This looks like a little kid's clothing company or something. And so it's not at all what I would expect from this product or this company. So just be careful of that. No matter how clever or cool the design looks, if it's not appropriate, it's really not successful, and you have to always bring those goals, those ideas through in your design. So this logo, I like it. It's a landscaping company, so you can see these little graphical elements as being successful in that way. They're kind of communicating that idea. But what's the problem with it? The real problem is I don't know if these are supposed to be read like letters. I don't know who this company is. So when I see this logo, I get confused. Is this DLC or is that D? Oh, is that at least supposed to be an O? So be careful of that as well. So when you're branding and you're creating this identity, if you have a word mark or a letter mark, that association and what those letters are saying can be really critical to the name of the business. So you want to make sure that you don't confuse, you don't make the word unreadable with your graphic. So you would want to step back. Now, maybe you could place one of these graphics off to the side or do something else with it, and it would be appropriate, but just be careful of that. Bianco and Cucho. I love the graphic. The text I think is a little bit overkill, but that's just my opinion. But this graphic is so fun. It's getting that energy out. And then the text, I think stylistically, I would have made it a little bit more sophisticated. So if you have a graphic and you have text paired together, try different solutions and try everything. But one thing you could try is making them kind of balance each other out. If the text is really sophisticated and the graphic is fun and playful, that brings kind of a whole new level of information to the product. Okay, so here's two examples of coffee company logos. So the first one, this logo to me is way too ornate. It's hard to scale. It's beautiful in a way. I mean, I love the frame and I love the decorative text, and the image of the cup as kind of a negative space rendering is really clever, but it's just too much. There's too much information here. It's just kind of not going to work as a symbol that needs to be versatile, appropriate, memorable, and simple. And then we go here. This one, on the other hand, I think works. You can put it in different circumstances. There's a lot going on, but it's still kind of bouncing off your eye. It seems like it would be versatile enough to put in a lot of different things. And one thing you can do is just scale the logo up and down. If I go back to that previous logo, when I scale this logo really small, all of this text gets lost. This logo, on the other hand, when I scale it small, I can still read coffee house perfectly. So make that logo small to make sure that you're not losing a bunch of information when you scale. Kate Spade, beautiful word mark, but then they have this great symbol that they use as well. So, um, it's perfect for the product. So sometimes if you have to put a logo onto a product, you really have to make sure that it's going to work and that it's not going to overwhelm, because the product itself should be the thing that grabs people's attention, not the little symbol on it. The symbol should be a way for people to recognize it, but it shouldn't overwhelm the design of the product. So it's really important for each logo to communicate a clear, consistent identity. It should be distinctive and memorable. Visual identity is all pieces designed for a group, such as letterhead, business cards, packaging, among others. So I'm just going to show you some examples of that. This is called a full bleed. When you take the graphic all the way to the edge, it's called a full bleed in design. So we can kind of be working with that as we kind of get into our poster design, perhaps, or some of our other elements. But you notice here this visual consistency that's occurring. It started with the logo, but it continues down to the products, the graphics, and everything that's being placed in there, down to even the website design here on this monitor. Here's another example. And you can see if you come up with an idea in your drawing that might be a potential logo, but then you end up you're not going to use it. Don't disregard it. Don't throw your drawings away, because you can always bring that stuff back in later on as you develop more things for this company. So when you develop their letterhead, you might have the potential to bring graphics in, or when you develop their website. So every little idea out there isn't going to be used, but there's often kind of this way that you can bring those ideas back in as you start to design more and more for the company. And just here another great example with the bus ad. So this became giant, wrap around bus ad, and you can see here the logo, versatile, memorable, and you can see it here in just pure white on the side of the bus and how successful it was, and on the letterhead and on the website. So logos are everywhere. I want you to analyze them. I want you to think about them. I want you to get opinionated about them. What do you like? What do you not like? Why do you like it? Why do you not like it? And think in terms of the goals of the logo. Are they meeting the goals? Is the logo communicating the right message? Is it versatile enough to use in a lot of different circumstances? Is it scalable, or does it have to be giant for you to be able to read the text? All things that you should think about. So as you start your project, you're going to put together a list of words that describe how you want your restaurant, your small restaurant, to come across. And you're going to kind of be the client as well. So you're going to have to think about that. Who is your target audience? Who do you want this restaurant to appeal to? And in what way will this restaurant appeal to that target audience? You're going to write a whole proposal out about the business, so that when we look at your design, we understand what the business is about. Find all the competitors' logos out there and just kind of put them on a document that you can look at. And it's really nice for you to then analyze the competitors' logos and see which ones you like, which ones you don't like. How is your logo going to be different than the competitors? And then you start to, once you have all the information from the client, and that for this in this project will just be your write-up of the client, and you have the competitors' logos, you have your words, you really understand what you're trying to achieve, then you start to sketch and brainstorm, and you go in a lot of different directions. So I want in your sketches this week, when you upload them, I want to see word marks, I want to see symbols, and I want to see combo marks. You don't necessarily have to have letter marks, but you can if you want. Those are kind of, for me, the same as word marks. So depends on, the restaurant or what you're trying to do. But I want to see a lot of variation, a lot of experimentation. Really think about all the different possible solutions. collect logos and graphics, scan, take from magazines, look for all the informational material out there that you might need. And this isn't just from competitors, it's just all over the place. Anytime you see something that strikes you or you think is interesting, take a picture of it or grab it, grab that business card and put it in your collection so that you can come back and be inspired from it. Because inspiration comes from a lot of different places. So, for example, in here, if you look at the graphics, then you go to some brainstorming. You can see how some of that was put into the sketching. And once you start sketching, you're going to choose actually 3 directions to go in. So you're going to develop 3 final grayscale logos. That won't happen for a couple of weeks. This week, I just want you to focus on the sketching and writing the write-up up, but eventually you're going to be designing 3 grayscale logos that will turn into color logos that will turn into a business card. So here's kind of the initial sketch. Here's the 3 ideas. And then you would then go on to render these a little bit better to make them a little bit more prominent so that you can see and analyze them. So good logo. You want to do a good logo for this class. You want to think about what makes a good logo, and you want to be able to have kind of a discerning eye and analyze what makes it good. So here's just 3 different logos to end on. I love this giraffe logo and how they cleverly put that giraffe in between the R and the A there. And this one, I love the line going through the text, becoming part of the text, but also kind of thinking about this as a graphic. So I thought this was a beautiful example of a really nice logo, although it is a little hard to read, I have to admit. So have fun with this. I think that's my last slide. Look on the Canvas interface so that you understand the project and send me an email if you have any questions. What you will be uploading this week are your sketches, your client write-up, your 2 or 3 adjectives, and then some of the competitors' logos, some of the examples out there. So you're going to find your restaurant and you're going to start to design a logo for it. And that restaurant should, like I said in the beginning of the lecture, be a very small business, a mom and pop business with not a huge chain.